Morning, everybody. We have over 146 people joining this morning, so just give us a second as people arrive, just in case we have to let anybody in. And anybody has any difficulties, just bear with us just for 1 minute. Many thanks. Just bear with us while we let a few more people in. It will probably take about a minute to get over 150 people into the webinar, so we'll start in a couple of minutes. Thanks for your patience. Just bear with us. I think we've just got another 30 people to let in, and then we'll get started. Thank you very much for your patience, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience there. We've still got people joining, and we will have, I've no doubt. And what a popular subject it is, 156 people here this morning. So welcome to you all. And for those in the UK, because not all of you are, it's a lovely sunny day for once, which is lovely. As we limp forward to Christmas after what's been a particularly challenging, weird and wonderful year this year. So I'm joined here by Marie. We'll talk a little bit more about Marie and myself in a little bit, but just a few housekeeping rules. Please switch off your phones. Now, most of you are on mute anyway, and so we can't hear you. But what we've aimed to do, Marie, Marie and I, is to put an awful lot of information into 40 minutes and have a good Q&A session at the end. So please, please, please submit your questions. I will be monitoring the Q&A section throughout. So if you have questions as we go throughout this deck, for want of a better word, or webinar, please do let us know, because we'll answer them as we go along and try and make it as interactive as possible. And where I can, I will allow you to ask the question yourself. I'll open up the mic for you to do so. If you prefer to leave the question to the end, you can just say, I'd like you to answer the question at the end anonymously. I'm quite happy to do that as well. So you can choose whether to be anonymous or otherwise, and we will answer your questions as best we can. If you ask us anything we don't know the answers to, it does happen. We will come back to you and we will acknowledge the question on the webinar. So please, there is nothing that we won't have seen before, and things are changing every day in China. So ask away. There will be, for those that stay to the end of this webinar, we have created a Little Red Book guide, and our Little Red Book will be talking about as a channel. It's a very, very effective channel for a lot of our brands, especially within property, within retail, now within education, and most sectors. We're finding it a very, very effective lead source. So do stay to the end, and if you then scan the QR code, you will be sent a guide. We've translated this from Chinese, and it looks at all the opportunities on the Little Red Book platform, with some examples as you as a brand, how you can engage. So without further ado, let's get going. So Marie, next slide, please. So why are we here? Marie and I have now done 4 webinars this year for social media, and this is very, very different to anything we've ever done before. For those of you on this webinar who know very little about Chinese social media platforms such as Weibo, WeChat, Little Red Book, Bilibili, Douyin, we will be covering them as a very light touch. We're focusing very much today on what's changed post-COVID in terms of behavior and what your opportunities are. There are videos for that. I'll talk about where to source all that information at the end. But we're here because we're asked the same questions from our clients, and welcome to all of our clients on this webinar as well, of which there are 30 of our clients on this call. So thank you again for your continued following us on EC on our webinar series. So it's really, really important that we listen to what our clients have to say. And these questions that we've hoped to answer in this webinar are questions we're being asked all the time. And they are things like live streaming. What's it all about, Domenica? Why is it so popular? What can I do to leverage that? What are the changes in consumer behavior post COVID-19 China? Because as we well know, China has recovered really, really well. Do I need to create video? And if so, how long? And what should it do? How important is it? We don't have the resource. Will it make a difference to our results? And also, and finally, let's not forget offline activations with online. And most of the brands on this webinar, and we've got everything. We've got F&B, we've got property, we've got education, we've got fashion, we've got footwear, we've got beauty, we've got pharma. I can honestly say that digital is integral to everything we do in China, but so is offline activations. And we will talk about how to integrate that effort with your marketing to be successful on social. Next slide, please, Marie. So our aims for today, just to make sure you're in the right place at the right time. We're going to talk about changing consumer behavior in 2020, mainly in light of COVID-19, which of course in China hit in January, whereas in Europe it hit here in March. We're going to look at key shifts in Chinese social media landscape. So we'll talk about the platforms, but we'll talk more about the changing landscape of what one can now do to leverage those consumers on those platforms, so formats. And we'll also talk about what is trending, what's popular with different segments of Chinese population. And we'll provide some insights into the biggest challenges that we've seen over the last 9 months, how to overcome them. And we are going to look at some case studies from some of our brands. We've been very careful to leave out confidential information. It's really how you can leverage social media platforms in different industries to drive leads, because that's what we're all here for, essentially. That's what marketing is all about. Drive brand awareness and credibility, certainly, but drive sales. So we'll talk about that as well. Next slide, please. Who's this for? This webinar is for anybody in the marketing industry who's looking to target Chinese global consumers, so in mainland China and globally. We'll also talk about the challenges of closed borders in a second. It's also for brand owners, brand ambassadors, CEOs and MDs, so anybody who is currently using Chinese social media platforms and wants to do it better, or wants to know what the next best thing is and make sure that they're leveraging all the opportunities. This will help you drive your new marketing strategy for Q1 and 2 in 2021. I can honestly stress that right now, this is what we're certainly saying to clients, I wouldn't be looking to do a marketing strategy for China for the whole of next year, because it's going to change, and it's changing every day and every week for us. So I'd look realistically at Q1 and Q2 2021. Have a plan for 2021, January to December, but certainly focus your efforts on Q1 and 2, while we kind of know the way that the land lies, so to speak, because it's likely to change significantly. Just had a question, which I'll check on. Next slide, please. Somebody's just asked about recording and presentation. If you scan on the QR code at the end of this webinar, you will be sent a link to the Little Red Book guide, and also something we're doing as an activation for Chinese New Year, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. You can also, on the same link, when you respond, you can say, would you please send me a link? And we will send a link to this presentation, which we're going to host on YouTube, much easier that way than trying to send a very large file to you. And you'll find all of our past webinars, videos, vlogs and podcasts also on our YouTube channel. But thank you very much for the question. I hope I answered that. So let's get cracking. So who are we? So most of the people on this webinar know myself and Marie, but Marie and I are quite different. I have a real focus at Emerging Communications on B2B education and property. They're my passion subjects, being an ex-chemist, I suppose. And I spend a lot of time training and a lot of time doing consultancy. So quite rare for a CEO. I like to be quite hands-on. And Marie, who joins us here, just give a little wave. I've been working with now for 4.5 years. She's fantastic, speaks fluent Chinese, spent a long time in Beijing. And anybody who knows China, if you live in Beijing, you become extremely fluent. And Marie, for her sins as well, has been my Chinese teacher a couple of years ago. I now have another one. I put her out of her misery. And Marie is very specialist in food and drink, fashion, beauty, travel, and B2C markets. So between us, we do a lot of consultancy on social media. Next slide, please. So why listen to us? That's what a lot of people say to me. There are lots of Chinese digital consultancy and agencies out there, some of whom are on this webinar. Welcome. It's really important to understand and to stress that the Chinese market is really complex, and getting it right is really important. And it's no longer a case of being on social media, localizing what you have in Western social and hoping for the best. It just won't work. And we'll talk about why not in a minute. So we take the relationships with our clients very seriously. And actually, we take the relationship so seriously that we only really, we're quite sort of like fussy at the start of a relationship as to who we can help. So if we can't help a brand, we'll say, I'm really sorry, we're not the right agency for you. And to that end, we have a very good relationship with our clients. We treat them like family, and we're there as part of an extension of their marketing team. We're not there to tell them what to do. We're there to guide them through what is at the moment probably the most challenging landscape I've ever in my 35 years had to navigate. And that's our job. We're one step ahead of you and to tell you what your opportunities and threats are. Next slide, please. So we have a challenge today, and Marie and I can honestly say this is the most difficult deck we've ever written, because things keep changing. And every time I write something down, it's changed. So be aware, this is how it stands December 2020. And we've tried to keep this as timely as possible. So something that can sit up on an evergreen platform and you can all view for the next couple of months at least, but things are changing, so be aware of that. So we're trying to fit all of that into about 40 minutes to allow plenty of questions at the end. So please do send us questions. So we've tried to involve multiple industries, multiple categories, so that we can demonstrate across every industry that has signed up for this webinar. As we got more and more signups, and it was getting to nearly 200 people today, we've tweaked this quite a lot, because a lot of people on here, a good 80%, are quite mature in the market. So if you have got any sort of more introductory questions on the channels, do not hesitate to get in touch. I will send you a link to community management, the channel introductory social media one that Marie and I ran a couple of months ago, and a number of other introductory elementary Chinese social videos. Next slide, please. So let's see where China is. Now, for those of you sat here in Europe, of which a vast majority are, but we also have welcome Australia, New Zealand on the call, Hong Kong, Singapore, and not yet the US, because they're not yet awake, but I know a couple of people have asked for the recording over in the US. So China's very different. As we all know, COVID hit China first in January. Doesn't mean it started in China, I hasten to add, but it was more prolific there in Wuhan. And China locked down very, very early, third week in January, around about Chinese New Year. They locked down. They were very, very, very strict on their restrictions. It was literally, you could not leave the house. There was none of this. You can leave the house to visit the vet. You can leave the house once a day, and all the various changing legislation we have here in the UK, by way of example. It was strict. And more importantly, it wasn't just strict. The government were very quick through the use of technology to track COVID cases. So once they got The growth stemmed. They then have used drone technology to make sure if you were going in and out of district when they let people out of lockdown that you were healthy and you couldn't take it with you. They impose very, very strict quarantine restrictions to the extent that we can't go over there with a British passport at the moment. And what happened was these restrictions meant that China recovered very, very, very quickly. And I would say sort of late May, early June, when I spoke to my team and my friends over in China, things were almost normal. By July, they were completely normal. By that, you're seeing events, opera, ballet, and pretty much everything back to normal in China. Domestic travel, airline travel, train travel. But the difference is everywhere you go, you're tested, and everywhere you go, you are tracked. And you are, if you're near somebody that has COVID, you are then made to quarantine. There is no lapsadaisical attitude about it. And that has really meant that China has bounced back. There is a real optimism, a real resilience around Chinese consumers. There's this feeling, well, wow, I feel really optimistic. It gave me a chance to think about what I want to do with my life. I've adopted new behaviors, and we'll talk through some of those in a little bit. Some of them are quite funny. And there's a real kind of like optimism, and just unemployment is now back to pre-COVID levels. And if you look at China's GDP has grown by 1.8%, expected to finish the year over 2%, whereas we've shrunk 4.5%, is actually going to be more than that. So China is doing really, really well. And there is a sense of revenge as well. There's a sense of, I was locked in my apartment. And bear in mind, in China, most consumers do not have gardens. So imagine being locked in an apartment, not being able to leave. I've faced similar things with my family in Italy, not being able to leave apartments as well. So it must have been really tough. And you had to be really resilient to get through that. But there's this sense of, right, now I'm going to spend money. And there's been a lot of expenditure around certain categories, which I'll talk about in a second, but a real revenge spending on, beauty and DIY and etc., which we'll talk about later. Next slide, please. So priorities have changed. A lot of Chinese consumers have reassessed working habits. So for anybody who works closely with China, you'll recognize that working at home is just not a done thing. And this has changed the way things are done. A lot of the people, my friends that work for non-international companies in China, for Chinese companies that have never been allowed to work at home, now work at home a couple of days a week. My China team, the same. They always historically wanted to go into the office. Now they work part at home and part in the office. And there's a real sort of changing of behavior, a changing of priorities, more priorities around family. Massive growth in the pet market, the cat market, the dog market, the DIY market, self-improvement, yoga, health, online, gyms, online training, books, education, buying beauty products, running home spas, you name it, doing your own hair. I mean, some of it's hilarious. But just even things have changed. Like a couple of months ago, I put something on LinkedIn where an American film premiered. I can't remember the name of it. You'll have to excuse me. American film premiered in China and it was live streamed. KOLs live streamed it. So there wasn't a red carpet event in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. They actually live streamed it with KOLs. First time I've ever seen that. They've been launching very big productions in China online and live streaming them, as opposed to doing them in theatres and in cinemas. Having said that, theatres and cinemas are open and they're very careful about testing people. And decision making's changed. The Gen Z, which I'll talk about in a second, generation especially, have become a lot more fussy. And you've seen a real opportunity for a lot of brands on this webinar today around what we call the grey market, the silver market, the over 60s, 70s market, have become prolific shoppers online. And if they weren't before, they certainly are now. And an awful lot of brands, especially in pharma and beauty, are capitalizing on that as well. Next slide, please. We couldn't be here today without touching on 11/11, and most people on this webinar will know about 11/11. which is China's equivalent to Black Friday, but a lot bigger. And we sort of sat here going, COVID, is it going to be similar to last year, do you think? Well, it was huge. Even I was shocked just at how much it's grown, 32% year on year. So there is nothing stopping the demand in China for brands that are global as well as local. You've seen 250,000 brands in total, but 31,000 of those are overseas brands. And over 20% of those are new to Alibaba, and not just Alibaba, because 1111 now is a festival on Little Red Book and Douyin and Tmall and Taobao and JD. It is now a festival that was started originally by Jack Ma, but it's a festival across all channels in China and very, very, very popular. Live streaming, AI and virtual reality were really big this year. You saw a lot of really big brands do some phenomenal activations for 1111. And 1111 this year was very different. It wasn't one day as this started a couple of years ago, more like 2 weeks of activations leading up to 1111. With brands not discounting so much like they used to. Obviously, if you were an FMCG, absolutely, you'd have an 1111 discount code that would be substantial, 20-25% off. But if you're in the luxury industry, you're not going to do that. So we've seen a lot of GWP, a lot of gift with purchase, a lot of promotions specifically around 1111 for products or services that have never been sold before, and a lot of new innovations. So it's gone away from being a purely discount festival. So why have I included this now? I've included this because social was integral to 1111. Whereas it used to be an e-commerce festival, it's become a festival. And social has driven a lot of the expenditure. With a lot of the channels that Marie is going to talk about, creating new ways to shop. And it's not unusual you see a video in China, a pair of shoes that you want, you click on it, goes straight through to the store, you buy it. The journey is very short and very seamless. And 1111 has kind of blown me away this year. And I'm expecting not dissimilar behavior in Chinese New Year, albeit the borders are closed. And so what we're going to see is an increased demand again for cross-border from British brands using WeChat, using other forms of cross-border from the UK and Europe and the US. But we're also going to see an awful lot of consumers buying brands on platforms like JD and Tmall, as well as, of course, bricks and mortar, which has recovered in China, but is a lot more experiential than it is here. And so they have fared much better than we have here in the UK. Not least, we've had 2 lockdowns and they've only had 1. But it really is, I think, a sign that China has recovered. Just a few other things, just luxury spend generally is really, really strong. Expenditure on property, especially in the sort of like mid-range, 500,000 to 1.2 million, which I class as mid-range, as opposed to the 3, 4, 5 million. We've seen so much investment in property in the UK, US, and across Europe, largely due to our pound and also due to stamp duty legislation not coming in until next year. And a lot of spend on online entertainment as well, which interestingly kind of carried through 1111, but just generally a lot of expenditure on things to keep one busy. I think there's this sentiment now, people have got used to being at home a little bit more, because in China, you order an awful lot of food to go home, but you're out quite a lot as well. And I think people have just reassessed priorities a little bit more. Next slide, please. So the new generation Z. So most people on this webinar, this is the segment they're trying to target, whether you're a university, whether you are a beauty brand, even property, if you're trying to sell to Chinese students. And this is becoming quite a difficult segment to target. 90% of luxury brand managers have admitted difficulties from a Walpole recent study. And the 20 or under generation are becoming a key target for a lot of secondary businesses, even B2B. So why is it difficult? And if you think about it, we're talking about a generation that have grown up with digital. That's all they know. So it's part of life. It's an expectation. If I want something, I want it now. There's an expectation of a seamless service, often online. And storytelling is becoming critical. You can't just talk about your brand and localize what you've got on Instagram or Facebook and expect to get any traction anymore with this segment. It's just impossible. You need to really get to know them to such an extent that we're working with brands where we will work specifically with their KOCs, so their key critical customers, the customers that spend all the money, and treat them as a separate segment within the Gen Z segment. And either through gifting or through activations, get them to be the mouthpiece for the brand, because that's really integral to the way that Gen Z behave. It's word of mouth referrals, it's peer groups. And we've even seen that in behavior on WeChat, around WeChat video, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, because that's a new thing that's happened in the last couple of weeks. But just WeChat searching is going to be, the algorithm is based on what your friends are searching on, what your friends are saying. So it's very much peer-to-peer recommendation. And things such as sustainability and being transparent about your social responsibility has become more important post-COVID than it was before. People have reassessed what's important in life. They've started thinking about the future. They've started thinking about, well, who's this brand affiliated with? What KOL is this brand affiliated with? What other brands are they affiliated with? Do they have the right values for me as an individual? Do I want to follow them? And it's no longer a question of being a brand that you've heard of either, which is what their parents would buy. My generation would buy in China, whereas they are very much, I want to be an individual. And if the brand doesn't understand me as an individual, I'm not going to buy into the brand. But if they do understand me as an individual, I am going to tell everybody about it. And when we look to work with a new brand or on a new channel, but certainly with a new brand on social, one of the first things we do is a competitive audit to see what your competitors, global competitors, so I'm talking local Chinese competitors as well as global, not British competitors, are actually doing, because that almost sets the scene as to how your potential consumers see the market. And the ones that are doing intrinsic storytelling, curating content with KOLs, curating video that really tells a story, are doing fantastically. And I'm seeing some phenomenal campaigns from some very, very large brands, but equally phenomenal campaigns from brands that are quite small in their niches and in their categories. So it isn't even about size, it's about relevance and resonance. And Marie will talk a lot more about that when she talks about the channels in a minute. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move over to Marie now and go on mute, and I'll keep checking questions. There's one here. I'll just double check that it's not something we need to answer straight away. No, that's the same one I had. So please send your questions through for either now or for the end, and I will be back a little bit later on. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So as you know, the digital landscape in China is very, very vast. In fact, it is so vast that we usually do a half-day workshop on just a handful of channels, because that's really the amount of time you need to get into the nitty-gritty and the history and everything else. And we did, in our last webinar, Social Media 101, go through the basics of what are the channels, what is the content, who are they for, how do you use them. So if you want that kind of introductory content, feel free to swap back to our last webinar. In this one, we're really going to focus on what are the main changes that have occurred that you need to be aware of for 2021, and how does these changes impact on your marketing strategy for next year. So obviously, one of the key changes is across all of the key channels, we've seen massive growth. So WeChat, which was already a giant, has grown a lot. Weibo has increased by 37 million. So for Weibo, we've not only seen a huge increase in audience, we've also seen a huge increase in the age of audience. So we're getting more and more Gen Z using Weibo. We're also getting more older generations using Weibo. So that has definitely seen a renaissance. and then Bilibili for Gen Z. So as we talked about last time, Bilibili is really a Gen Z video platform. So that has seen massive growth. And I think part of what's really helped Bilibili is that it has had several key partnerships with educators, such as the Shanghai regional government. They partnered with Bilibili to develop an online curriculum for their students, rather than having teachers having to do individual WeChat calls, which really obviously helped a lot of teachers. And I'm sure a lot of teachers over here would have loved something like that this year. And then obviously Little Red Book, or Red, has tripled in its number of monthly average users, and it's doubled in the total number of users. And as such, it's seen a huge change in the types of content that we see on these channels. And just through all what's gone on with the quarantine, we've seen an increase in the amount of time per day that people spend on social media, the amount of video content that people are absorbing through social media, and even the number of social media channels. If you can imagine, the average social media user in China has at least 9 social media accounts. So they are getting in touch with brands and discovering brands and products along a huge variety of touch points. So it's no longer just a Weibo and a WeChat. As I began to mention, so social media is more integral than ever before, and that's across all segments. So we've seen a huge boost in using social media and online services in the medical industry, in the B2B industry, property industry, in travel, entertainment, education especially. We've seen huge double-digit growth in a lot of those industries. And it's more than ever, it's about businesses that maybe weren't prioritizing social media have suddenly had to learn how to put social media first and how to become digital first, or in a lot of cases, digital only. And for a lot of companies, that was a very steep learning curve. And obviously next year, even with things opening up, one thing that we've seen is that Chinese consumers, once they go digital, it's very hard to get them back off digital. So for example, grocery shopping during the epidemic, we saw a huge increase in online grocery shopping. Even after everything has opened up, people who previously did their grocery shopping offline are still continuing to do it online. And same with online education, online fitness, online B2B. It's still going to be something that carries on into next year, especially if you're doing cross-border. So here is one case study we have for the education. So this is an example of using social media to engage Chinese students. Now that's been particularly difficult this year with travel restrictions, border restrictions, and all of the messaging around the coronavirus. But we managed to work with the University of Stirling on live streaming as part of a education fair that was hosted on Weibo. And it was very successful. We had over 81,000 participants. And as you can see, they actually managed to increase their Chinese undergraduate applications in spite of what's going on globally. And similar with Unite Students, they are a key university student accommodation provider in the UK. And we managed to use blended social media. So not just talking to their Chinese audiences in China that are looking to come to the UK this year and next year, but also talking to students already in China. And as Dominica said, for Gen Z, word of mouth is becoming a lot more of a motivator than in, for example, my generation, the post-90s generation and the post-80s generation, that can be more influenced by KOLs and celebrities. So for Unite, we really focused on community leadership and community activation, getting people recommending services to their friends, or having their friends join them in buying or booking a accommodation for next year.
Just one thing on Unite, Marie, and actually not just for the education sector. There has been a real reliance from brands in China on distributors and agents, depending on what sector you're in.
Definitely.
And this causes a real issue, doesn't it, Marie, in terms of controlling your brand message, in terms of I mean, there's a lot of property brands on this webinar, by way of example. You're reliant on the agent. It's really important that the agent is part of your stakeholder marketing for China, but they're also promoting a lot of properties. So you've also got to promote the brand as well. And with Unite, one of the things we've tried to do, one of the key KPIs for this quarter and last quarter is direct bookings, because it's really important for the education sector, not just accommodation, but universities, to not be so purely reliant on agents, so to do direct bookings. And this particular activation, which was both off and online for 11/11, which superseded last year, and given COVID, that's incredible, but 74% of them were direct bookings. And I know that a lot of you have spoken to me personally saying, Domenica, I've got an issue, I'm so reliant on my distributor. So we've got a couple of B2C brands that are, or I'm so reliant on agents, or I'm so reliant on the one salesperson I have in market. So you can do both. You can look after your stakeholders and treat it as part of your marketing, overarching stakeholder marketing, as well as drive direct bookings. And I think there has to be a balancing act. And provided that you keep the relationship going and it's a good relationship with your other stakeholders, there's no reason that you can't have both. I just wanted to add that in. Thanks, Marie.
Definitely. Fantastic point. And as I'm sure a lot of you may have heard of short video or live streaming, but I feel like we've talked about it a lot. And previously, you know, we've definitely encouraged brands to do short video, to do live streaming. But before the pandemic, it was always seen as a nice to have, or something you do if you have a particularly healthy budget that you need to use up. Whereas in 2020, it definitely went from a nice to have to a must have. And for a wide variety of brands that previously would never have thought about investing in short video and live streaming. You know, when brick and mortar shut down, QVC style live streams were really the only way that people could get products to their consumers. And it was being done through influencers, it was being done through VIP customers, it was even being done through resellers and even employees getting online and really shouting about the brand and shouting about the products. And I think with that has come a lot of sort of painful learning moments for brands. So especially brands that previously had avoided doing short video and live streaming, such as ultra luxury, B2B and other industries, they have definitely had a number of case studies where they've learned the hard way that short video and live streaming can't be underestimated. It isn't simply turning a camera on and getting products out. And there's been a lot of backlash about consumers complaining that experiences haven't met their expectations, or influencers that have completely gone off script because they haven't been briefed properly or they haven't been prepared properly. And that's really had an impact on the brand. So that's something as well that we've had to, a lot of brands have had us help with this year. And even for channels, short videos and live streaming has been a very rapid turnaround point. So for example, this year, WeChat released their own competitor to Douyin, also known in Western areas as TikTok. So their 10 WeChat channels is basically a short video mini program within WeChat, where you can open your own short video WeChat account and post videos for people to share and comment on. And likewise, Little Red Book, that had sort of experimented with some video and live streaming previously, they opened full live streaming and short video capacities on their channels, and they had a lot of e-commerce live streaming that was happening, and they've really gone to town in that respect. So we're seeing more than ever a blend of live streaming e-commerce becoming basically one of the main way to sell products. For example, as Domenica mentioned with 11/11, for Tmall, live streaming sales accounted for 60% of their GMV. Wow. So it was really a main way to sell products. It's not something that simply you do once or twice a year for a campaign anymore. And here's a very extraordinary case study for a client of ours, Premier Research. So they're in a very niche industry that most people wouldn't think of this industry and think live streaming. So they do biopharmaceutical development and clinical research, a highly B2B service. yet through doing live streaming webinars, we managed to generate a high profit client for them that closed within a number of weeks. Obviously, we managed to raise a high amount of awareness among key industry leaders and industry partners in China for their brand, which was fantastic.
I think this is a critical thing to mention, is in Europe, you find a lot of the historic B2B sectors like pharma, medicine, chemistry, all sectors that we do a lot of work in, would never consider using video as an infomercial or using live streaming or using webinars. But it's extremely popular format in China, even amongst very complex B2B sectors. So do not think for 1 second that live streaming webinar type format is purely for the fashion beauty industry and for automotive. It's not so. And it is just quite simply the easiest way for somebody to engage with an organization. And in this particular context, Premier Research is in a very, very niche industry of consultancy. And if you are about to instruct somebody or a consultant in this industry, you want to be absolutely sure they're credible. So credibility was key. And the webinar allowed us to build that credibility, build an audience, and they're over the moon because it's enabled them to engage with and sell to a high profile, high profitable customer off the back of that webinar. So it's all about the audience. And you can use these formats in all sorts of industries, property, B2B, complex education sectors, as well as universities. So it's not just for the B2C sectors.
And another thing that we've seen is brands investing in offline. I know we've all talked about online, everyone's going online. But when I say offline, I mean that it's been a very different way. So anyone who knows me, who's been to one of my past events, know that one thing I'm obsessed about, that I've been talking about for years, that most people don't seem to really invest in, is mooncake marketing. So mooncake marketing in China is a phenomenon that I absolutely love, because I don't know of any other festival in China or abroad where brands really commit to creating something for customers, for stakeholders, for their VIPs, that showcases innovation, creativity, and just puts the branding in such a clear, and the brand positioning in such a clear, tangible way. And this year was no different. Mooncake marketing has gone absolutely insane. So for example, JD.com, their mooncake sales were up 135% year on year, because a lot of businesses were buying mooncakes for their key stakeholders, for influencers, for their VIP customers. And a lot of people were also using mooncakes to send to their friends and family. So sales were going insane. And a lot of brands that previously hadn't done mooncakes have come out with their own branded mooncakes for sale. And what we've also seen is a lot of customers demanding direct to manufacturer orders. So they don't want a mooncake packaged product that is straight off the shelf. They want something that they can talk to a manufacturer and say, I want this flavor, I want this kind of packaging, I want this kind of added surprise or present within the package. And we've seen that as well with computers, digital equipment. 1111, all electronics now seem to be very highly C2M, and also in the luxury jewelry market. So some of China's leading gold jewelry brand, they got a huge increase in C2M, so customer to manufacturer orders, ordering highly personalized luxury jewelry. So that's one thing we've seen that I think is going to continue going up. We've also seen offline events being used to solidify positioning, solidify branding, and to get customers talking to each other. So the picture of the planet that you see up there is from a dating app in China called Soul, that is extremely popular with Gen Z. It really does the whole storytelling element really well, and it really connects with the Gen Z psychology very well. So for example, on the app, you're not allowed to have any photos. You don't have a photo profile. You don't have pictures of yourself, because it's all about an emotional connection rather than a physical connection, or a sort of showing off your lifestyle like you do on other social media channels. And then one form of direct marketing I've seen really take off this year that I hadn't really seen in previous years is in the education sector. So universities, instead of just sending out acceptance letters, they've sent out branded, personalized acceptance packages. So this, for example, Beijing Aeronautics University, their acceptance letters came with a 3D built-in aeroplane. And then, for example, Nanjing, the picture here is Nanjing University, that came with loads of branded, highly stylized content about the university. It came with packages of rose tea made from local roses grown in Nanjing. It came with replicas of some of Nanjing's most famous artifacts. It's really about adding that personal touch and getting the students excited and telling their friends all about your university.
I've also seen, sorry, Marie,
yeah.
I've had some questions I'm going to answer just quickly before 4, but
yeah.
I've also seen an awful lot of B2C brands recently in the beauty sector, and also cosmetics cherry pick their KOCs, their key customers that are always talking about the brand in a positive light, sending them gifting, making it really bespoke to their purchasing, right the way down to their color palette that they use. Really, really clever. Do not underestimate the power of offline, whether it be direct marketing or whether it be a simple thank you to key customers. That could be customers that you know have referred a lot, that live within your properties or your apartments. That could be student ambassadors or future student ambassadors on campus. So think of it very much that culturally, to say a thank you in China is really important. I mean, I don't go to a meeting without a gift, whether it's a supplier, a client, or staff, when I'm in China. So it's perceived as the right thing to do. But if you go one step further and you make it really specific to their purchasing habits, a bit like we've seen with Procter & Gamble in the mother and baby market for many years with the bounty packs. It's not dissimilar to that. For anybody who comes from those sectors, it can be really effective. I just want to answer a couple of questions before we move on. So Marie, we've had 2 questions. So thanks, guys. Keep them coming. One is from Samantha asking, and this is a really common question with live streaming, should we do live streaming in Mandarin? And can it just be translated? Can you have somebody transcribing? And my answer to that would be that all of our live streaming and all our activation is in Mandarin, because you are talking to a Chinese audience. When we talk about, we've got a couple of hospitals as clients, for example, and some really complex pharma sectors. So when we're talking to professors on, say, a webinar, not all of them speak Chinese. So we will sometimes have part English, part Chinese, knowing full well that the audience are all speaking English. So it's partly in Chinese, more out of courtesy. But if you're doing any beta, which of course, Samantha, you're in a B2C sector. If you're doing any B2C activation, if you're doing any activation in property or education, absolutely has to be in Chinese. One sector we'll talk about in a second, Patrick speaks fluent Chinese, which is fantastic. So somebody who works for Battersea, so that's fantastic. But if you don't have that, then we would put somebody into that role for you. But ideally, we try and have somebody within the organisation. And if it is somebody that it isn't in the organisation, we need to get to know the organisation really well. The other question was from Johnson, and this is a really good question, Maria. I'm going to put this to you. So live streaming, if you're going to do live streaming in China time, because we're talking about Chinese audiences in mainland China, what time of day is the most popular? Put you on the spot there.
Well, this would also really depend on who you're trying to target. So obviously, most people tend to tune into live streamings either on their way to work or in the evenings once they're home from work, because in China 5G is very prevalent and they have fantastic internet connection, even on the underground and things like that. So it tends to be the morning time when people are traveling to work and they want something to keep themselves entertained, or after work. In certain sectors, you also get a lot of activity sort of mid-afternoon. You get people sneaking online to look at things, or sort of after lunch, they're feeling a bit tired, they want a break, so they tend to not be working completely. So you do see in certain sectors a sort of mid-afternoon increase in content consumption. But for most broadly speaking, I would say the early evening to, well, sort of from 7 o'clock onwards. For shopping, some live streams can go into quite late at night because people do tend to stay up to shop. And obviously around weekends, it will also depend on what kind of sector you're on. But the main thing for live streaming is about really having a clear funnel of marketing your live stream. Don't set up a live stream and expect people to come. You really have to be using multiple channels to advertise and let people know about your event well in advance, so that people can come. Lovely. And what other questions have we had?
Okay, so gifting.
Yes.
So obviously we've just been talking about looking after key customers, and we've had an attendee anonymous, so I can't give their name, who is asking, how does that fit in with the whole sustainability thing? Interesting. When you're talking about packaging in certain sectors, growing concern for consumers, how you tackle that, Marie?
So it's all about doing it in the branding. So for example, making sure you use completely recyclable materials. Or one thing that's also very popular is materials that can be used to better the environment. So for example, a lot of museums and art galleries and things like that, they do gifting with things such as seeded paper. So the cardboard that their products are wrapped in, or the bookmarks that they send, and actually has seeds in it, and it's made from completely recyclable material that can basically just be put in the ground, and you can grow seeds from your marketing materials, which is a great way. It's all about the messaging. So for example, Chaling, which is a LMVH brand that's tapping into the Buddha youth market. Their branding is all about using only China sourced materials, using a lot of materials that are connected to Chinese medicine. Also, every purchase that you make of their brand, they donate part of that money towards planting trees on a nature reserve in China. So everything they do, everything you buy from them, you can feel good about it because they're telling you how you're going to benefit China by making that purchase. So I think definitely it is a balancing act of sorts, but there are definitely ways to communicate your values while also giving your customers a nice personal touch. Are there any other questions, or should I carry on? I know we've got quite a few coming in, but I don't know how many you want to answer now and how many you want to answer at the end.
What I would suggest, there are quite a few, so we'll try and do them at the end.
Okay, fantastic, lovely. As I've seen some really good ones, so I'm very excited for that. And Little Red Book. So Little Red Book has always been a lovely, lovely platform that beauty and fashion and travel brands have loved, and everyone else has just kind of ignored. But this year especially, Little Red Book has really broadened the categories. I mean, now you go on Little Red Book, you type in the name of a UK university, and there will be so much content on there from students that are trying to attend that university, students currently attending the university, people trying to sell courses and products to help you get into those universities. And even in, for example, the tech sectors, there's a lot more male-focused content on Little Red Book than there was previously. Health and wellness content, luxury property, investment advice, and investment related photos. It's really grown, and I think as well part of that is because it's now adapted its functionality to really compete with Tmall, JD and WeChat. And not only that, but this setup cost to set up an official account, and especially to set up your own branded store in Little Red Book, is significantly less than what it would be to set up a store or to sell products through Tmall Global, as they have a lot of restrictions around the minimum spend that you have to spend on their channel in order to have a store on their channel. And also, obviously, there's a lot less noise on something such as a Little Red Book, whereas Tmall, you're going up against at least 31,000 other global brands as well as domestic brands. So that has really come into its own this year, and I expect that trend to carry on next year as well. Here's one study talking about property. So we did a Little Red Book video for Battersea Power Station, and we had fantastic results. And as Dominica said, we were very fortunate in that a member of their team, Patrick, is wonderfully fluent in Chinese, and he looks amazing on camera. So we managed to do some great assets with him. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Dominica, because I know you were very involved in that.
Just basically, we're seeing such an increase in lots of platform usage apart from Weibo and WeChat for sectors like property. It's a really big challenge in property and education sectors this year, because you're selling to consumers that can't travel to come and visit a penthouse suite and actually experience it. So it's absolutely paramount you bring that alive through video. You bring that alive by showing the lifestyle they're going to buy into. And we are seeing an increased number of not just leads in the property industry that are driven this way, but people actually buying property without coming to the UK. I think a lot of consumers in China are concerned about basically making sure that they can put their assets in different places. So redistribution of wealth, also buying off plan in a lot of instances so that they can get the money out in dribs and drabs from China. But they're just making decisions now because stamp duty legislation will change next year here, and our pound's not very strong, so it's obviously a lot less expensive to buy. They're seeing this as a really big opportunity, which is why the property sector's done so well domestically and internationally. And video just brings that entire experience alive. Even something as simple as a salesperson within a property developer taking a video on WeChat to somebody directly live and saying this is what it looks like. So it doesn't have to be, not all of the video has to be storyboarded and shot, although that's a really important part of storytelling. You just need to start using video as part of the sales process. Yeah.
Fantastic. So going through, I'll try and speed through because I'm aware of time.
Okay.
The main challenges for 2021, I think, because China is a very buoyant market at a time where a lot of other markets are seeing a decrease in spend, it is going to be a key market for brands next year that previously hadn't focused on it. So you're really going to have to grow your consumer touch points and perfect your consumer outreach to stand out in a market that's going to be noisier than ever. And obviously for the inbound market, which is very close to my heart, there is going to be a lot of uncertainty around are consumers going to come or not, but there are going to be ways around it. Cross-border is growing rapidly. There are more and more options. And I think, for a variety of sectors, it's about getting creative and finding new ways to get your products and services to your consumers, not waiting for them to come to you. And another thing, obviously, is around that uncertainty, there is the chance that now the vaccine's around and everything else, that things do suddenly flip back to normal and suddenly Chinese consumers are allowed to come over. And in that time period, what's going to happen is the floodgates are going to open and everybody is going to be shouting for Chinese consumers, just like Golden Week every year. Media costs are going to go through the roof. Media booking is going to be insane. And you're going to be catching up on a long period of dormancy where you haven't been talking to your audiences. So even in that uncertainty, there needs to be a strong strategy for ongoing communication and long-term lead generation, so that when the floodgates open, you are top of the pile, top of the pick. And as I say, there has definitely been a gap in the relationship building and communication between Western brands and Chinese consumers, which will need to be shortened and sort of bridged next year for brands that have sort of put things on hold. We're also faced with regulations coming in for various platforms such as live streaming and KOLs. There's going to be increased restrictions around people being able to tip. because if you know anything about the fan economy in China, Chinese fans are kind of insane. And there've been a lot of sort of 17, 18-year-olds that have taken their parents' bank card and tipped their favorite influencer 10, 15 grand just because they want to get a shout out. So there's going to be a lot of regulations around that kind of thing. And also Gen Z and post-COVID millennials are going to be expecting a lot more authenticity, transparency, and value-based marketing and actions from brands. And I think the opportunities are, as we mentioned previously, brand content consumption engagement is at an all-time high. Platforms such as Douyin and Little Red Book, the engagement levels and the view levels per content is, I think, 3 or 4 times the average of what it is on Instagram. So you're getting a lot more engagement for your sort of investment in content. Demand among affluent consumers is also really high. You know, as early as May, June, affluent consumers were ringing up their travel agents trying to get ways to leave the country to go on holiday. There is definitely still demand for overseas products and overseas experiences. And there is rapid growth in China for new categories such as DIY, gardening, cooking, online education that weren't as prevalent before COVID hit. And brands that are innovative, authentic, and committed to the Chinese consumer will be rewarded. As we've seen at 11/11, a lot of brand new, very niche SME brands were among the top sellers because they did a good job at connecting to Chinese audiences. Again?
I'll try and scoot through this because I'm conscious of time and we have a couple more questions still unanswered. So recommendations, and as I said, focus on Q1 and 2 at the moment because things are changing quite rapidly in China. The first thing is be transparent and be proactive. If you're not transparent about your values, your practices, what you stand for, who you are as a brand, then it's just not going to work, especially with the Gen Z audiences. It's absolutely critical that you communicate very well with your consumers and as much as possible segment them down and make sure it's relevant and listen to them. Social listening, we haven't talked about in this particular webinar. There isn't time. I've done an entire social listening webinar. If you're interested, please email info@emergingcomms.com and I'll send you a video about community management and social listening. Listening to what your customers are saying about you and utilizing that content, listening to customers that are disgruntled about your service or product and doing something about it is critical to your brand equity. And all too often, brands don't put the effort behind it. And I'm talking all sectors. It's the holy grail of social media. And if you do one thing when you leave here, you must do that. And just really encourage user-generated content from your users and from your advocates and from your customers across all stakeholder groups so that you can use that as part of your marketing. It's a lot more effective and has a lot more traction than you talking about yourself. Get your customers to talk about you. Next slide, please. And diversify and amplify and mobilize. I would actually say, just if you were to think of one word, speed, absolute speed and agility. The brands that have shone through, survived, and let's talk about, you know, it is pretty much survival at the back end of COVID-19. And the ones that haven't, they have one thing in common. Those that have moved and pivoted their businesses and services to the new now, the new normal, which is here to stay, and those that haven't. You only have to look, unfortunately, at the demise of Arcadia Group, who did not keep up with e-commerce, digital, experiential retail. They didn't know their consumers. They were not in a good place pre-COVID, let alone post-COVID. And look across sectors at just so many brands that have done really well and versus those that haven't. It's those that are talking the right content to the right consumers that's relevant. They're using the right channels to those consumers. They are part of a conversation. They're mobilizing their customers to talk about themselves. They are looking after their platinum customers. They're looking after their KOCs. They're using video and live streaming as part of their activations. And more importantly, whatever plan they've got in place, and we certainly do it with our brands, you've got to be prepared to change it. The legislation, every time Boris gets on his podium or the government change our lockdown restrictions, will change what we're doing. because it's affecting border control. You know, every time there is a change in government legislation, there was changes in live streaming last week, which is writing a post about. WeChat's just launched videos, so things are changing. So be aware of those changes. Work with somebody who's going to be one step ahead of you to tell you what they are, and change your marketing accordingly. It's not about spending more money, it's about being smarter with your budget. Next slide, please. So recommendations, personal touches, really important. All stakeholder groups, key customers, distributors, agents, whoever you're talking to, even your sales reps in China, your staff in China, it should be one cohesive strategy with everybody working to the same plan. Don't do sporadic engagement. I've seen too many brands stop talking to Chinese customers because they can't come over, especially retail. Their attitude is, we'll put all of our money behind when tourists can come back. We've got issues around tax-free, which is going to impact on expenditure. So you need to be thinking about cross-border, and you need to be doing it now or yesterday. And there are many ways of doing that cost effectively as a starting point, like WeChat. Again, I'll have a video on that. So think about, just even if it's a low level, making sure you've got engagement on key platforms on social all the time. And be experimental in your approach. Try things. Some will work incredibly well. We do it all the time. We might say, I know a webinar might seem a bit odd. Let's try. Oh, wow, that worked. Let's do another one. Oh, live streaming. Gosh, that was really successful. So do try different formats and measure everything, and tell stories. Curate content. Don't just instruct KOLs or bloggers or programmatic or media. Make sure you're telling a story, and make sure it resonates. And start thinking, for some of you brands, especially retail, B2C, food and drink, for goodness sake, you should have planned Chinese New Year already. And if you haven't, you need to be doing it pre-Christmas. One thing that Marie said that's quite telling is that media is going through the roof in China. Again, KOLs get booked up months in advance. If you want the best KOLs that are right for your niche, especially food and drink. I got asked earlier on about food and drink activations. You need to make sure that you know who your endorsers are, your ambassadors, your industry, who you should be talking to. They need to be booked already. You need to have come up with a campaign activation, come up with creative, and be rolling that out in January. So just, be aware of what's coming up. All the festivals next year are going to continue to be festivals in China, whether they can come to the UK or Europe or not. So to make sure you're doing activations, and just showcase strong brand values. And that has to come from you. You have to control that. If you've got a distributor doing your marketing in China, you've got to be approving it. The brand values, essence, and comms has got to be coming from you. Even if it's localized, it's got to be approved by you. And I've seen too many disasters. Again, I've done a crisis management video, if anybody wants it, talking about how to make sure you localize your marketing. There's 2 cultural training sessions I've run with my Chinese teacher, who's also a cultural trainer, that you might find interesting. This is particularly important in some of the luxury B2C sectors on this webinar. And next slide, please. So before we wrap up, because we are running out of time, there's a bit of a lag. We talked today about what we were going to do, which hopefully we've answered for you. We've talked about key trends, changes in behavior, shifts in social landscape, and insights, challenges and trends. There is too much to do in an hour. So without further ado, for those of you that have stuck it out to the end, we have created the Raw We. Marie wrote this, and it's incredible. And I had it designed over in the States. An interactive Little Red Book guide. Little Red Book is becoming very, very popular with a lot of our brands, and we're getting incredible results, especially leads. So if you would like a copy of this Little Red Book, please scan the QR code or email us at the end if you have any issues, and you will be sent a download of this guide, which has been translated from Chinese and looks at opportunities across the channel, what brands can do to leverage different audiences, and how to capitalize on Little Red Book. We will be rolling out in 2021 a guide to WeChat, Weibo, Douyin, and Bilibili. So watch this space. If you sign up to follow us and join our email list, which a lot of you will have done anyway to join this webinar, but make sure you're on our list, then we will let you know when those booklets and guides are out. Just for those that are looking at getting onto Little Red Book, we've put together a package for you. If you want to go onto Little Red Book and you want us to create some content and just get you started, because a lot of brands are like, but Domenica, I have to go through a procurement phase with an agency. We know that that's very difficult, especially for universities. If you want us to set you up on Little Red Book, we're doing an offer. This is open to our clients, obviously, as well. And if any of you are already on Little Red Book, then by all means, you can take up the offer, which is we will curate a Chinese New Year campaign for you if you book it by the 11th of December. By that, I mean, we will choose the right activation, the right creative, we'll come up with a copy, we'll do everything. The only thing that we can't do is pay for the media that will be needed for the activation, such as the KOL, but we'll do the rest, which we normally charge £2,000-3,000 for. So make sure you talk to us about that, because we want British brands and European brands and global brands to be really capitalizing on Chinese New Year. If there's anything like 11/11, the shopping and the spending is not going to stop. It's only going to continue. It's just a question of being relevant. And any issues you have around that QR code not being able to get in, please email us at the end, but there it is again. And thank you very, very much for joining this webinar. We were due to do a property webinar next week, which I have decided to run in January, because there is changing legislation that I heard about last night that I think is going to impact on some of the things we're going to talk about. And one of the things that we're very, very hot on at Emerging Communications is making sure we're relevant and we're up to date. And things just change. And I literally got a news feed about 12 o'clock midnight, so early China time, and I just want to check it out and be sure that we are relevant. So we'll be holding that now in January. I know a lot of property clients are on this webinar. We'll email you with the new date. If you would like to join any of our future webinars, please follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. All of the videos of all the past webinars are on there, as well as vlogs and podcasts. And I'm starting a podcast series. Or email us info@emergingcomms.com, where we will let you know of all future events. I hope you've enjoyed it. I haven't had a chance to answer all the questions because I'm actually blown away by how many questions we got. So thank you for all of those things. So there are a couple of you I couldn't answer. I will email you, and then we can take this offline this afternoon so that I can answer your questions. If some of you do have questions but you just didn't want me to ask them, then please do email us afterwards. We will get back to you. And if we can help in any way with your social strategy, we'd love to, or just to have a chat, then you can book in some time with myself and Marie. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. If you're in the UK and you're in southern region, go and enjoy the sun. That's the most sun I've seen for a while. So get out and get some fresh air, and look forward to meeting you all again on another webinar in January. And have a wonderful Christmas. And I will see you ahead of Chinese New Year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Marie. Bye.